But welcome. This is the pre-webinar to the organization design class that we'll all be physically joining a week from now, or I guess a week from tomorrow. I want to welcome you all and thanks for joining in. My name is Chris Worley. I'll be I'm the presenter today, and on the call with us is Sue Mohrman and Beth Gunderson, who will be also part of the faculty during the workshop. And today, what we want to do, here's some little handy ones. Now, with this new format, these may not work, but hopefully you can find the chat box, which happens at the bottom of the screen. There's a little icon with like a bubble. And again, if you put in some comments or questions during the presentation, I will try and answer those. And if you can send them to all participants, that will help me as well. The three people that you're going to meet next week are Sue Mohrman, myself, and Beth Gunderson. We're all associated with the center. Sue and I are senior research scientists at the center, and kind of the focus of our practical applied research is organization design and change. And a couple of years ago, we added a good friend and colleague, Beth Gunderson, who was most recently at General Mills and has been working with us over the years to join us and be part of the faculty. So these are the people that you'll get to meet and work with during the workshop. Today, what we wanted to do, and this is the second time we've done this, because based on feedback that we got from people during the session, was people wanted to hear kind of a little preview of coming attractions, if you will. Could we spend just a little bit of time giving people a little bit of background on the primary design framework we're going to use? So that's how these pre-webinars came up, so that we can just kind of give you a quick overview of the STAR model, which is the one we'll be using. We want to talk a little bit about the things you can do to get the most out of the workshop, and then answer any questions that you have about the pre-work, the cases, the reading, and the workshop itself. So I'll be walking through the STAR and describing it, and then so I'll be doing quite a bit of talking over the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll stop and give you an opportunity to ask us some questions. If it's all possible, feel free to put those questions in the chat box, because that'll break up the monotony of just listening to me chat for a while. So feel free to do that. And like I say, I'll keep my eye on that chat box so we can answer questions along the way. But that's kind of the purpose. That's the direction that we're headed today. Wanted to start with just kind of a definition, all right? So to describe what it is that we think we're going to be talking about for 3.5 days. The purpose of the workshop is to provide you with a method and some specific content related to how you design organizations. And so what you'll see here is that designing organizations is a process, and so we'll talk about the process of redesign and what's involved in helping organizations think about redesigning themselves. But the primary focus of the workshop is on the elements themselves of the organization that we think, when you put them together, or not just we think, a lot of people think, that when you put these elements together, they contribute to the performance of the organization. And when we talk about performance, or we talk about organization effectiveness, we see that as a multi-dimensional, multifaceted idea. We're not only trying to improve performance in terms of financial outcomes, of profitability, lowering costs and things like that, But we also want to include in that definition of performance customer satisfaction and loyalty, employee engagement, and recognizing employees and the workforce as a stakeholder in the organization. And then increasingly in today's world, we're also talking about social outcomes, so community involvement, environmentally reducing your carbon footprint, doing things that are good for the environment as well. So when we talk about effectiveness, we really do see it as a multifaceted kind of idea. And the idea of design is putting together these different parts of the STAR model so that they're in alignment and they support each other and they support the strategy. So we call that a configuration, right? It's a design. It's an assembly process where we put these different pieces of the organization together in service of these different kinds of outcomes. All right. And so the model we use is Jay Galbraith's STAR model. It's one of several models out there that you'll find, McKinsey 7S being one, and there have been several others, over the years that have been proposed. But Jay was a member of the CEO faculty for a long time, and in working with him and in recognizing the popularity of this model, we just adopted it and said, this works. This is a great model. It's one of the most simple models, and it's also one of the most powerful. So I think that's just a really good combination of simplicity and power. So I'm just going to kind of walk through this model and talk about each of these pieces and how they contribute to effectiveness and how they sort of fit with each other. And so that's kind of the flow. We would get some slides. Charlotte asked if we get some slides that cover the ROI measurements you're measuring. So we aren't going to talk about the actual measurement of that performance. In other words, you probably have engagement or profitability or any kind of reports. So we won't be talking about the actual calculation of any of those or the calculation of return on investment from this process. We don't have a specific section or segment that talks about that. What we do talk about is specific case examples and the extent to which they used all or part of this model and some of the subsequent outcomes that did happen. But in terms of actually calculating an ROI, no, we won't talk about that specifically. Okay? When we talk about the STAR model, we always start with strategy. You'll notice that several of the models that we're going to introduce to you always begin with strategy because you sort of need to understand the direction that the organization is going and what it's trying to accomplish and how it's trying to accomplish that. So we'll be talking about strategy on the first day of the workshop. And if I was going to summarize this piece, you can see, kind of some words here that describe strategy. But if I was going to try and summarize the whole thing, what we're trying to get a sense of in the organization is the direction. We want to know what direction the organization is headed in terms of goals, for sure. Are you trying to increase profitability? Are you trying to grow? Are you trying to gain market share? What exactly is the strategy of the organization? If it's a function, you're going to look at specific functionally related goals that you're trying to accomplish. So direction is defined partly by goals, but direction is also determined by how you're going to meet those goals. And is the direction in terms of how you're going to meet those goals clear to everybody in the organization? We'll be talking about strategic intent and using an intent as a metaphor, as kind of a short label to use to describe the strategy, and then we'll operationalize the strategy using the business model idea. You may have heard of the business canvas concept. You may have heard of operating models and different kind of business models from different people. We'll be using that as a way to operationalize the strategy and talking about the extent to which the strategy is broad or narrow, aggressive or passive, and use that to operationalize things. These questions, however, begin to give you a sense of and ground you in the kinds of ideas that we need to know in order to understand the strategy of the organization. So it's a cornerstone piece of the STAR model, and it's a cornerstone piece also of the change process if you think about it. If you just don't know the direction that you're headed, then a lot of these choices become moot, and it doesn't matter. Strategy helps you make trade-off with respect to the choices that you've got on the other parts of the STAR. Okay? Sitting sort of at the top of the STAR itself is a set of work processes, and we put the word capabilities in there as well because a lot of organizations are talking about capabilities, and what this represents is the most important, the top 3 to 5 activities that the organization carries out to deliver value to customers. Right, so a capability is a pretty big bundle of work processes, and it represents things that the organization can do. Work processes are kind of routines. They're again, fairly high-level pieces of work that the organization do. And I think one of the easiest ways to get to work processes and define work processes would be to say, tell me what your organization does. And you might come back to me and say, well, we design, manufacture, and distribute toys to different places. Okay, you just told me what your work processes are. You design, manufacture, and distribute. Notice you're not doing retail. That's not included in the things that you do as an organization. If I ask you, tell me what your organization does, you say, well, we develop software. There it is. That's your core work process. And inside of that core work process, you may have, thousands of little tasks that you do, but for the purpose of design, we're not going to worry about those little tasks. We'll let the continuous improvement Six Sigma people deal with that. We're going to deal with the really big core activities of the organization, the key core activities that are driving value at the highest level of whatever unit you're designing. So like I say, for an enterprise level, you design, manufacture, distribute, retail, source. Those would be big issues. If you're in a function like HR, you're into, attracting, developing, and retaining employees. Those are your core work processes. Right, so they can be kind of generic, but they can also be quite specific to your organization, and you want to try and find that set of work that drives value for the customer. And just looking ahead, a lot of people, one of the questions we get a lot of time, what's the difference between work processes and management processes? Work processes has to do with what you are actually doing to drive value for the customer. Management processes are the things that managers do to coordinate work, right? So managers don't actually, do the work, although a lot of times, we're asking managers to do some of it. They're not actually doing the work. They're managing and coordinating the work. And so we'll get to what those key processes are in a second. All right, so think about this in terms of what does the organization do to produce a service or product that's adding value for customers? And usually there's not very many. You want to get 3 to 5 kinds of core work processes. And these are really the way the strategy is manifest, right? So you see there's a direct relationship, and we'll talk about this on Tuesday afternoon, a direct relationship between the strategy and the work processes, and there has to be a strong link there in order to design the organization well. A lot of times when people talk about organization design, they think you're talking about structure. And so for sure, one of our objectives during the week is to convince you that design is actually it's a holistic idea. It's a systems idea that involves all of these parts and pieces fitting together. And we'll talk about 2 kinds of structure inside of a design. We're going to talk about core structure, which is the way we usually talk about structure. Do you have a functional structure or a matrix structure or a geographical structure? Cisco, I think, still claims to be one of the largest functionally oriented organizations, and so the organization is broken up by specialties. So you have engineering and sales and HR, so all the different specialties become their own core unit in the organization. You get into divisional or SBU, strategic business unit structures. GE was sort of famous for it. ABB uses this structure. Hewlett-Packard used this structure for a long time. And then you get to more fancy ones, the matrix. Most of the aerospace and defense contractors, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, they're set up as matrix organizations. And we'll talk even about more fancy ones than that, like front-back structures that are very customer-centric, like IBM sort of uses. Okay, so we're going to talk about core structure, and just as important as the core structure, which defines, the work that happens in vertical silos, we also want to talk about how you work across silos. And so we'll talk about lateral organizations, lateral structures, coordinating mechanisms, the work that people do to sort of make sure that the different vertical pieces of the organization are integrated and work together. Turns out this is a huge task. It often tends to be one that's left undesigned, and after listening to Sue and Beth and I, we hope that you have a very different view of that this is something that must be intentionally designed in the organization and not left to chance. It's that important. So we'll talk about these core structures. We'll also talk about these lateral structures. Moving on, here we get to this management processes and work processes difference. If I think about, and if we think about management processes, we really sort of boil it down to its essence, and those essences are the sort of the strategic planning process, the direction setting process, the goal setting process, resource allocation and budgeting. All of those are intended to help set the direction of the organization. Given what the strategy is, as the first step, sort of the second step is, okay, now that we know what our strategy is, how are we going to put that strategy into place in terms of goals, objectives, resources, KPIs, things like that. So there's one management process is what we call this direction setting process. Second one that we talk about a lot is communication. Again, communication is happening all the time. The question is, are you intentional and deliberate about making sure the right information gets to the right place at the right time for the right reasons? And the third thing we're going to talk about directly is decision-making rights and decision processes and understanding roles and responsibilities and who is ultimately accountable for making certain decisions that are critical to the strategy's success. So those are the three we're really going to talk a lot about. You can also include things like learning, knowledge management, change management. That can also be a management process. But we're going to focus on the three that are really kind of key for driving the business, at least in the short run, and that is direction setting, communication, and decision making. We then move to rewards and performance management. And certainly, if you think about organizations, and we're trying to get this work done through a certain set of structures, and it's coordinated by the management processes, clearly one of the things that's missing in that little scenario there is, do people in the organization understand what's in it for me? And so we want to really be clear about how powerful rewards are inside of an organization. And rewards include monetary and non-monetary. This is just sort of a legacy issue. We call it rewards, and non-monetary rewards are just as powerful, sometimes more powerful than monetary ones. And we want to talk about the way the organization uses systems of value, whether it's money or status or a work assignment, you know, sort of an assignment to a key strategic initiative. Maybe you're part of your digital initiatives inside your organizations. Being a part of that, you know, a very critical strategic sort of initiative inside the organization is a form of reward. And so we really want to be clear about what goals or accomplishments or behaviors, right, that are dictated by the strategy and the work processes and the structures, which of those behaviors or accomplishments trigger a reward, what type of reward is triggered, is it money or different kinds, then we also want to talk about the way those rewards are given out. And so what's the performance appraisal? How does that happen? How do people get feedback about their performance? Feedback itself being a reward that might happen. So we're very interested in understanding this lever of pulling this system together and the power that rewards have in pulling together and aligning the systems and the elements of the STAR model. It's a very powerful notion. Obviously, the performance management subject is one that continues to be talked about within HR. There's just a lot of, if you've been following LinkedIn and Twitter and some of these things, the subject just continues to come up as either a big sore spot in the organization or a place where we're seeing a lot of innovation. And certainly we want to encourage a lot more innovation on this one because we see it as an amazingly powerful part of the organization. Okay. Lastly, the last piece here is the people element of the STAR. And what we're trying to do here is look at the talent management process. In other words, how do we attract, develop, and retain the right skills and values in the organization, right? We want to bring people in that have the appropriate skills, competencies, knowledge, experience, and values that are going to fit with the design that we're putting together. So it's important to think about, you know, who those people are that we're trying to bring and the skills and knowledge they're trying to bring. And as we think about the way digitalization is taking over and causing disruption in the marketplace, the drive and the desire to bring on digital talent in the organization is making for some pretty hot competitive marketplaces. And so if you've got a certain way of doing that brings your organization advantage because you figured out how to attract and retain people because of your strategy, for example, because of the way you treat people and your management processes and the way feedback is given in terms of development and careers, leadership development, that's all part of this people element of the STAR. And it all you know, for certain work processes, you want to have certain skill sets. For certain structures, you want to have certain competencies and experiences for certain kinds of structures. Right? So again, what I'm trying to paint here is a picture of an organization and the way it's designed such that you're putting together work processes, people, structures, rewards, and management processes that all fit together in service of a strategy. And we're trying to align the organization to that strategy and marry a business model, which happens up in the strategy box, with an operating model in terms of the way the organization is put together and designed. So that's sort of a high-level summary of the model we're going to play with starting next week. When we step back from that model, right? That's the content. That's the stuff we're going to sort of chew on and work on and argue about and debate and talk about next week. If we step back and try and describe why is it that Sue and Beth and I are doing this, and what's the what's the broad level thinking that we're using when we put this class together. And I think it's pretty popular today to talk about design thinking. Most of the time when people talk about design thinking, they're talking about experience design or product design. It's being used as user experience. And so a lot of people talk about it in a fairly specific way with a particular piece or part of an organization. On the other hand, Sue and Beth and I see it as a much bigger issue. And what we're trying to do or trying to recognize is that designing organizations has a lot of the same functions and serves the same outcomes as product design does. We're just going to deal with a much larger system. And that design process, right, starts off recognizing that there are goals out there. There's problems to be solved, whether it's poverty or terrorism or just want to be more profitable or increase the engagement inside your organization. There's all kinds of problems and objectives and things that we would like to accomplish on the left side of the diagram. And on the right side of the diagram, we have to recognize that the world is not, you know, there's not unlimited resources to accomplish those objectives. All right? We have to recognize that. And there are constraints to achieving those. We don't have, you know, there's only 24 hours in a day. There's only 7 days in a week. Time is a limited resource. Time is the enemy, I always say sometimes. We also need to talk about, you know, a constraint, and if you want to be profitable, costs have to be less than revenues. There's, you know, that's just a basic principle that you would want to have. So applied to product design, right? You can think about a problem or a goal to be achieved. You need to, I want to figure out how to get a bunch of people, get a couple hundred people from Los Angeles to Sydney in under 12 hours, and I don't want to have any environmental footprint while I do that. Okay, that's the objective. Well, on the solutions criteria, and we're gonna talk about design criteria when we get to the class. Solutions criteria says, well, okay, if I'm going to accomplish that objective, I don't have unlimited resources, right? I have to figure out how do I accomplish that without doing any harm to the environment. I have to think about what are my constraints and what are the capabilities that that plane or that mode of transportation has to have, and I have to live within that set of constraints, and that list of capabilities are things that the solution has to meet in terms of a criteria. And when you resolve those tensions, what falls out of that is an idea, right? A concept, a solutions concept, a design, right? And we're going to talk about an organization design that accomplishes goals within constraints, within certain sets of criteria about what we have to work with. And in order to come up with that design, if I'm designing this airplane, right, going from Los Angeles to Sydney, we need to have relevant first principles. And in designing an airplane, I need to know people who are good at aeronautic engineering. I need people who are really good in terms of material science. I need to have people who are experts in propulsion. And I need to know those first principles, because if I don't have those good, solid understandings and skills and knowledge with respect to engineering and doing the things that build an airplane, I can't come up with a solution within the constraints to solve my objectives. It's the same thing with designing organizations. And so the primary focus of our time next week will be on what are those first principles? Why is a matrix structure better than a functional one, and under what conditions is that true? What's a better way to do design, decision making? How do you link strategy and work processes together so there's a real clear notion for everybody to understand what we're trying to accomplish and how? So we're going to spend a lot of time on those first principles. And for each of the elements of the STAR model, whether it's people or lateral structures, we're going to talk about what are those key things, because you need to have those in order to come up with a good design. With that, let me, again, back away from some of the content. Again, if you have questions, drop them into the chat box, and I'll answer them. But so we're getting to that point where you can begin to ask questions for sure. But we do have some feedback, or at least some feed forward for you in terms of how do you make the most out of this workshop. Yes.
Do you want to turn it to me for this?
Would you like to do? You can do this, Beth. Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. This is my little piece based
on
my historical. So this is Beth Gunderson. Chris mentioned my name early on, and I was in your place a little over a decade ago. Is when I first took the course that you're going to be taking, and over that time had sent a lot of my colleagues out to USC and really came up with this greatest hits list that you see here about how can you get the most out of this workshop that you're going to be attending. And I will tell you there will be a lot of material. You'll see frameworks, tools, we'll give you case studies, examples, you'll learn from us, you'll learn from your peers that you're sitting with. So you are going to come away with a lot of content in your head. I would tell you some things to prepare you to accept all that information and to be able to compartmentalize it in the right way in your head is I would say spend time on your pre-work. Really start digging into a case that you're working with. The more you can come with real life issues, challenges, opportunities that you're chewing on, the better. Read and reflect on those case studies. It's really important as we go through the week that we will be diving into some case studies. And for you to have an understanding of those cases will just allow you to play better and get more out of those activities. And then also, I know that the workshops are very full days. I will tell you that we want you to be prepared for a little bit of homework in the evenings. So you may have friends or colleagues in the LA area that you want to bounce out for dinner, not saying that you can't do that, but just to give you a heads up that during the week we'll be handing out a case or two in the evenings for you to read through. It's not an onerous task, but just to know that not to be surprised there. And then as we sort of fire hose you with all this information during the week, really start thinking about how you can apply this back within your own organization. I know when I took the course the first time, I came away with a couple key things that I wanted to translate back into General Mills at the time and begin training some of our HR business partners on. So throughout the week, start thinking about what that might be. And then also, if not now, during the week, start planning in advance who you can share your learnings with when you get back to your organization. One of the best things to do is once you learn something is to teach that to someone else. And so what I would say is if you come away with during the week that there may be one module or one section that would really resonate with, say, your HR business partners or someone within your org development, org effectiveness group, think about taking that and teaching it back to them quite quickly after you return. The way this material really sinks in is to come in prepared, to get the most out of the week, but then quickly turn around and either apply the learnings or teach those learning back to others in your organization. Back to you, Chris.
Back to me. And so with that, let's open it up to see if anybody has some comments or questions that got generated by my overview of the STAR model and kind of the philosophy behind it in terms of design principles, or anything that Beth talked about in terms of what's the best way to get the most out of the week. And if you're online and you unmute yourself, we'll try and listen to you. Otherwise, if you type in, Alice says you can unmute everyone. Go ahead, Alice. Why don't you unmute everyone, and let's see if we get a question.
I just sent a question through the chat. It's just kind of like I'm surprised a little bit, for lack of a better word, is trained that rewards and performance management is not under people as kind of like another component of the people angle. Why is that? Yes.
So one of the things that it's always sort of hard with the STAR model is we come up with these 5 pieces plus strategy. And then what I try and tell people is also it's a nice label to call it the STAR model because it's got 5 points on the star. But I think more important than that is look at the lines between the elements. And so I often joke that we put the lines there not just to make it pretty. It's there because there are some concepts, like performance management, that you could probably put in a couple of places. You could probably put that as a management process. You might be, it's clearly parts of rewards, and it's also part of, you know, how you develop your people, right? So it can go in kind of in some different places, and I like to think performance management is one of those things that kind of sits on the lines in between things. I think just to follow on with that, I think the way we talk about lateral structures and lateral mechanisms and coordination and integration, I think that's also one of the ones that you could put it in management processes. We put it in structure, but boy, you can't do a lateral structure without management processes and rewards, right? So there are some things that kind of fall into different places, and if at your organization it made the most sense, and within your culture and how you guys, you know, have put your organization together, if it made sense to put performance management over in the people, I think that's fine. I think that's fine.
Thank you.
That's one where actually, because Jay Galbraith was with this program, this is Sue Mohrman, by the way, was with this program for a number of years. This question almost always gets asked, of course. And what he basically says is that he specifically put that in between people and management processes because it has to reflect both. Figuring out what the strategy is, translating that into goals, objectives, giving feedback on the goals and objectives, and making sure people know what their responsibilities are, and then aligning the reward system with that is absolutely a key management tool in the organization and a key management process, and it's one of the most orchestrated management processes in the organization. It also is a people process in the sense that when we take a talent lens, we think about the motivation of people and the rewarding them for whatever their particular job requires, and the making sure that that's aligned with strategy is part of the design part of the organization. So they all get put together, but he thinks it's a big, he would say, I think it's a big mistake to see it as simply a people process when in fact it is your key tool for aligning what it is you're asking of people with what it is that the organization needs to have done in order to accomplish its strategy. So he specifically put it as its own start point for that reason.
Thank you.
The rewards, yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts, comments, or questions? Everybody know where you're going to be next week? Redondo Beach, California. Everybody's got your flights and
or the week afterwards.
Arrangements.
The week after, Chris. 2 weeks. I was like, next week I'm going to be in the office.
Well, that's just a testament to how messed up my life is right now. So I'm still 2 weeks from now.
Yeah. 2 weeks from now. Yeah.
Good.
Hey, this is Scott. I just had a quick question. In terms of the order following the 5-star model, do you typically do it, and are you going to speak to the order in which you do it? Like, does it all follow how you presented it, like clockwise, or are you going to talk about that in the session at all?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 sides to this answer as well. One is we'll present, and the course is lined out in the direction that I went through the star. And if you have some control over anything, we think that's the right best flow to do it. Then I think there's reality. The reality is sometimes you're going to get called into somebody's office and you're going to say, I want to redesign the organization, here's the structure. And you know, you have to find a very clever way to sort of push back and say, okay, what strategy is this thing in service of, and have we thought about the capabilities we're going to need to run that lets me know this is the right structure. So it would be really nice if you could do it this way, and we will encourage you to try and come back to your organizations and argue for a very systematic, deliberate, intentional process, all right? Because we think there's some advantages to doing that. We'll talk about those. But we also recognize, because, you know, all of us have been around in organizations, we recognize the urgencies and the exigencies of the moment. You know, managers are trying to get stuff done, and they see a problem and they think, you know, well, if I bring some people on, I just hire some new people and stick them in here, they'll figure it out. And then they start from the end instead of the front of the process. So we will present the stuff in the order that we think it should go, but we'll also talk about what we will call the design flow, and say, okay, well, here are the things you're going to have to do in managing the process, and again, here's the way we think it should go, but also talk to how reality, you know, sort of talks about it. And in fact, at the end of the week, on Friday morning, our guest speaker is Becky Spears, first of Sun Microsystems, now with Oracle, and she'll talk a lot about her experiences in taking this stuff and applying it inside of Sun and Oracle. So she'll give you another sort of take on the realities of the process and how she's managed some of that. No, it's a good question, Scott. Are you dealing with that down at the port?
Yeah, we're sort of in a reality situation / trying to right the ship. So I think we're very curious on the exact kind of system and approach to follow.
Got it.
Well, it sounds like you're bringing in a good case study to work on then.
Oh, absolutely.
Part of the processes that you'll be walking us through, will there be, I guess, a variety of tools that we might walk away equipped with that we could use depending on the leader and their level of readiness for going through org design overhaul, for lack of a better word?
Yes, absolutely. I think we try and keep attention, and the tension is back to this first principles idea, being really clear about what the guidelines, principles, why we're doing it, right? So that we're sort of embedding some knowledge into your thinking, and at the same time demonstrating how these principles sort of look in real life, and through tools and frameworks and questions and things that you can use and things you can modify, right? So if we give you a particular tool that shows you how to do decision rights, and that makes sense, and we'll talk about maybe some of the facilitation pieces that go along with that to get it done well. And you say, well, God, that's more than my particular manager can handle. How can I sort of push this back and make it a little simpler? We can talk about that for sure. We may not take class time to do it, but if you come up to Sue or Beth or I, we could say, okay, how do we customize this a little bit for your particular situation? But yes to the question, will you be getting lots of tools and ways of thinking about process, and, you know, I won't necessarily say checklist, but certainly we call it design flow, right? Here's the sequence of events and questions that you want to ask.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
I do think it's worth saying that we have Alice has put together an incredibly complete set of the tools and the approaches that we are teaching in the class. It'll be all in one spot, and it'll be easily click-onable, and you can use them in your company and modify them and tailor them and all that as well.
Yep. You'll get a link at the end of the program that any of the tools that we have in your notebook will come to you, that you can use them. All right. Any final questions? If not, I'm going to give you 10 minutes back on your day.
I'll take it. Thank you.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Like I say, we'll be in 2 weeks. I'll see you in Redondo Beach. Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I'm looking forward to it. Bye.
All right. Everybody take care.